May we pray. Oh God, we ask that you draw near to us this morning so we may hear afresh that word, that precious word you would have us to say to us this day. For we ask it in the name of your Son and for his sake. Amen. There is a great scene in that gory movie, Jaws. The scene is where Roy Schneider, who is the sheriff, is sitting at the table thinking about all the muck and mayhem that's going on in his town. He's troubled and he's frightened on what may happen even in the future. And as he's thinking about all those things, he catches his son out of the corner of his eye. And his son is imitating everything he does. If he touches his eye, the son touches his eye. If he takes a drink, the son takes a drink. And it goes on, and as the father watches the son, you can see the troubles on his face begin to melt away. The son is imitating the father. And there's a new great Cheerios commercial. I don't know if you've seen it, where the grandfather and the grandson are eating Cheerios. Has anybody here seen that? Isn't it a great commercial? Yeah, and the little fella, he's imitating everything his grandfather is doing. And he raises his hand, he turns his head, he does everything the grandfather does, even crosses his feet under the high chair, like his grandfather crosses his feet under the breakfast table. And the last scene is the camera pans back, you see their backs. Grandson, grandfather, and they're one and the same, because the grandson is imitating the grandfather. It was Reverend Charles Caleb Colton, way back in the 19th century in London, who first said, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Now, what he was talking about was how the world imitated English culture. But you and I know what is good for society and what is good for culture is also good for individuals as well. When we were children and when we were children, we had various idols, people we put on pedestals, people we wanted to meet, people who we wanted to be like. Some were superheroes, some were movie stars, some were musicians, and others were maybe athletes. Now, besides my grandparents and a weird uncle, Superman was my first real hero. I never quite got that flying thing down, but I wanted to be like Superman. But my real hero was an athlete. And his name was Dick Butkus. Dick Butkus. Dick Butkus was a linebacker, and I was a linebacker, and I wanted to play just like Dick Butkus. Butkus earned respect on the field. People who ran the football were afraid of Dick Butkus. So I watched every little move that Dick Butkus made. When he went to the sideline, he crossed his right leg over his left leg, and he put his hands on his hips. Guess what old buddy did when he was on the sidelines? I was just like that, right foot over left. When the ball was snapped, one of the first moves that Butkus made was to raise his arms. He would do this, and then he'd make his move left or right. Well, guess who else did that? I learned to raise my arms as soon as the ball was snapped. He tackled people with his face right in the chest. And guess who also tackled people with his face right in the chest? And I'm going to say it before Pete Pierce does. That explains my face. Yeah, most of us had heroes. People we really wanted to be like. And today it happens, the junior executive joins the corporation, and she looks around and she sees all these people with briefcases. Well, tomorrow I'm going to be with a briefcase. She's going to have a briefcase when she comes in the door. She may have a Investment Business Daily under this arm and a Wall Street Journal under this arm, and then the briefcase in her hand, because she saw her boss having the same thing. She may start dressing just like those supervisors. She'll start acting like the CEO. If the CEO likes Caesar salads, she may eat Caesar salads at lunchtime, just like the CEO. Now, the letter to the Ephesian Christians is actually a sermon. Paul never intended that letter to die right there with the Ephesian Christians. Paul assumed and wanted this sermon of his to be copied and shared to all the churches around. And it's been described as, by many as the most awe-inspiring of all of Paul's writings. I don't know that's true, but it's close. And his theme to these Ephesians believers is that God's eternal purpose was to grow the church, the body of Christ, to the universal, into the entire world, not just around the corner of the Mediterranean. But Paul knew that if the church grew in a universal way, people with different traditions, different cultures, different political opinions, different views on life were going to come into that church. And if things were not unified in some way, that church is going to fracture and fly apart because each one is going to be after their own self-interest. Each one is going to want their needs met, maybe even at the expense of another. So they're going to have to work together for the common good, for the church to become universal, by everyone imitating the same one. You see, if we're all different and we have different opinions and outlooks on life, if we're all imitating the same one, we all have the same view towards the same one, trying to get like this person or this one, then we all start coming together as one. All those little things that divide us up and cause us friction and disharmony starts falling away. Conflicts disappear. Differences disappear. So Paul tells the church universal, be imitators. Be imitators of God. Now, how in the world do you do that? God's invisible. How do you imitate God? Well, you imitate the incarnate God, God made flesh. You imitate the Galilean carpenter, Jesus of Nazareth. Thankfully, on a daily basis, most of us don't have to deal with profound issues of morality and ethics. The concerns you and I face most days are small scruples, mores that affect us greatly, but don't get on the national news. You know, the national news is comprised of wars and famines and murders and all those other things and political shenanigans. Our postmodern world moves at an incredible, fast pace. We're bombarded and befuddled with all this information, and I don't think we really have the filters. I don't think we really have the filters to separate the news we need from the rubbish we're given. Everything seems to hold the same weight as everything else. Thus, we have a lion killed in Africa, which was tragic the way that happened. But that trumped the murder and execution of hundreds of people in Iraq and Syria. And then there was the black bear who got into the dog food and ate too much and had a heavy carb diet and then fell asleep, went into a sugar coma for a while. And that trumped the execution of 5 service people in Tennessee. Yes, the news comes at a quick and hard pace and from many, many sources. It comes to us today on our telephones, on our iPads, on our computers, television, magazines, newspapers. It seems to permeate our privacy so strongly that we often feel that we're a part of the very thing that we're reading or seeing. It hasn't always been that way. You remember, some of you can remember, back during World War II, you went to the movies on Saturday to watch the newsreel to see what was happening in the Pacific and in Europe. And then that war ended, and 20 years later, we started watching the Vietnam War at our dinner table as Walter Cronkite edited what we were seeing. And we just kept record of the body counts and didn't think about these were real human beings. We just heard body count numbers. And then in November of 1989, we were watching our television, and suddenly there was a break, and CNN shows us all these explosions from this weird city in Iraq and the beginning of Gulf War I. Explosion after explosion, and all that AAA that went back up, and Peter Arnett and Bernard Shaw hid on the floor against the wall and told us what we were seeing over their shoulders. But it felt like we were right there, that we were part of the news. We're in it. And I don't know why you would do this, but you can get on your iPad or your computer, and you can go to YouTube, and you can see ISIS beheading people. They videoed it and put it up. Now, with all these images assaulting our senses, it's not surprising that social graces and codes of conduct and civility and kindness have become casualties of technology. However, it is in these seemingly minute things that the quality of life exists. Again, we're not confronted usually in the big issues of world affairs in our lives. What we're faced with on a daily basis are, shall I keep my word? Do I honor my commitments and my responsibilities? Should I be honest with this or that? Shall I honor the will of God in my life? Now, when you join an organization, it's assumed members of that organization will exhibit distinctive qualities. I can't imagine the Optimist Club bringing in somebody who is a total pessimist. You would think that the person coming in would exhibit some qualities, some characteristics of the organization which they join. Now, I've been a member of just about all of these through the years as a pastor. Some towns didn't have one and they had the other. So I've been a member of most of them. But one of my favorites is Rotary International. And I get no money for that commercial. It's Rotary International. And one of the things that I like the best about Rotary is its will to bring people together, to work together for the common good. And they have a mission statement, or they have a series of questions. Each one of them are to ask themselves when they have a bit of information. Is it the truth? Is it fair? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it benefit all concerned? That's the test. And I have to, Lord help me, I have to admit that many times I have prayed, I wish church members had that 5-way test. Can Christians lose their sensitivities? I think we can. I think we have. Just like the rest of society. We break basic laws without much thought simply because we think we're entitled to do so. 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Rolling stops through stop signs. Hitting the gas through the caution light. Parking on the yellow curb. Using the handicap spot. We're just going to be in there just for a minute. Just for a minute. But I can use it because I'm entitled. We will share that juicy bit of gossip later. Yes, we can become insensitive as well. I heard a sports commentator just a couple of weeks ago, and he usually does football, but he was, for some reason, doing golf. And he was really lambasting the rules and the etiquette of golf. And he was talking about how archaic those rules are today, like calling a penalty stroke on yourself when your ball oscillates, or calling a penalty stroke on yourself when you touch the ball with your putter and not meaning to putt it, or failure to put down the proper score on a card and being disqualified, or not signing your card. And at the end of that triad, he said, I don't understand why golfers on the 18th green take off their hat and shake each other's hands. And I thought to myself, he doesn't understand that golf is not just a sport. It's not just a sport. It's a social thing, and it's also a cultural thing. And you try to be in that competition with the golf course, not with each other, but you're in competition with the golf course. You're gentlemen along the way. But it made me think, is that who we have become? It does seem like that we're attacking any kind of standard or any kind of etiquette let me go to an experience I had just a few weeks ago. I was taught when a woman enters a room to stand as in honor of that person, and when she sits, I sit. When she stands again, I stand again. I learned that a long time ago. And one of the things I learned also along the way, a gentleman opens the door. And just a few weeks ago, I went to open the door for a woman at a store, and she laid me out. She told me she could open that door just as well as I could. That if she needed me, she would have asked me to open that door, and she didn't stop there. She described that door in ways I've never heard a door described before. And of course, I was embarrassed. I was red. I could feel the heat from embarrassment. And when the door closed, I didn't know what to do next. I just kind of stood there. And this little soul, maybe 90 pounds, this little soul, she looked up at me and she said, "You can open the door for me anytime." So she redeemed the whole situation for me. Paul's words are as sound today as they were then. Even in the church, we have a hard time getting it right. We start focusing on things that are insignificant. And it's the insignificant things that drive us apart as Christians. When the most important thing is for us to learn to be like the risen Christ. The most important thing is the love, the mercy, and the grace of the incarnate God. And that incarnate God is calling us to be like him. There was an old directive among Franciscan monks that they placed on themselves. They realized that giving alms, or tithes and offerings, if you will, was not enough. So they devoted themselves. They devoted themselves to finding ways they could mix their bodies with the ministry and mission they were called to do. So St. Francis, he kissed the eyes of the blind man when he dropped coins into their cup. When he took food to the leper, not only did he prepare the food, he dressed the leper's wounds. That's imitating Christ. There is a tale from Reverend in his book, Tales of the Hasidic Rebbe. And he tells a story of a man who dies and he goes off to hell. He goes to hell. And he's shocked because it's a banquet hall and there's this beautiful banquet table with every kind of food imaginable on the banquet table. The only problem is the people are not eating. Why? Because their elbows are frozen. They can't bend their elbow and take food off the table and put it in their mouth. So, the angel takes him up to heaven. The same ballroom, the same table, the same kind of food. And everybody there's elbows are locked, just like the ones in hell. But these people are eating. They're eating. How? They're feeding each other. They take the food off the table and give it to their friend or their neighbor. Being like Christ. Imitating Jesus. That's the call for us today. But that causes us to be vulnerable. And we don't care for vulnerability. I want to conclude with one last story. There was a Benedictine monastery that was well respected. It grew to unbelievable proportions because of the spirit of the monks. And then nobody knows really why. We can surmise. It started to dwindle. Little by little, people stopped coming. No longer did they come for worship. No longer did they come for prayer. They didn't come to study anymore in the mountain monastery. And the monks, as it dwindled, the monks got angrier and angrier, and they began to pick at each other and saying some very nasty things about one another, creating gossip toward one another, just on and on. And they got really bitter with each other until finally no one came to the monastery. And the abbot was brokenhearted. He wanted that monastery to be what God had called it to be. Now, one thing he noticed was down in the valley there was a hut, and in that hut was an elderly rabbi. And what he noticed about that hut was people were coming and going all the time into this shack of a place. Sometimes there were actually lines waiting to get in to see the rabbi. So the abbot creates a little travel pack on a stick, and he goes down the mountain to visit the rabbi. He knocks on the door. And the rabbi opens it as though he is a long-lost friend, hasn't seen him in years, and just grabs him around the shoulders and kisses him on both cheeks and drags him into the shanty. It's one room. It's dirty. And they sit down on the floor. And the rabbi gives him some tea to drink. And the rabbi is just filled with smiles and compliments. And the abbot is kind of taken back. And finally the rabbi says, "Why are you here? What did you come for?" And the abbot says, "Well, we're dying up there in the monastery, and we don't understand why no one's coming anymore. No one's coming to worship. No one's coming to study. No one's coming to pray. We don't know what to do. And we thought you might have an answer." And the rabbi sat there for a little bit. And in a whisper, almost as though the walls were going to hear what he was saying, and the abbot leans forward. He said, "I do have the secret for you." And the abbot lights up. "Oh, please share. Tell me what it is." And the rabbi says, "The Messiah is in one of you. The Messiah is in one of you." And the abbot just almost explodes. He can't believe what he's hearing. He packs up his little bundle. Out the door he goes. He climbs the mountain faster going up than he did coming down. And he gets all the monks together in a room. And almost in the same whisper, he says, "The rabbi said, the Messiah is in one of us." And they all look at each other. They're just dumbfounded. And they go off to their rooms, and they think about it. And the next day, the monks are a little kinder to each other, a little gentler to one another. They're telling the truth to one another. They cease gossiping about one another. They start doing their responsibilities. Loyalty and commitment now rises to the top again in their lives. Soon, new people started coming to the monastery for prayer. Soon, people came to worship. Soon, people came just to experience the Messiah among those monks. That's the secret for us too. If we strive from this moment forward to search out the Messiah among us, the same thing is going to happen right here at First Church. The world will come to see the Messiah worshiping, praying, and studying among us. Yes. What if every member did that? Amen.